Welcome. Good evening. We're pleased tonight to welcome two friends of mine, Bill Kristol. I just destroyed their careers. Bill Kristol, who served as, well, I won't give you all the biographical stuff because we have a formal introduction coming, and former Senator Rick Santorum. You'll hear more about them in a second. A special thank you to Margaret Hoover, who best to conduct a discussion about the future of the Republican Party than the host of Firing Line, who I think will elicit similar bunch of Firing Line fans there. And Margaret's a visiting fellow, a Pritzker Fellow at the IOP this week, and we're so grateful to have her. Upcoming events: on March 9th, we'll host a conversation on the long-term relationship between the U.S. and Iran. On March 10th, Peter Baker of the New York Times will moderate a panel discussion on the long-term impact of President Trump's impeachment, what it meant for American institutions for 2020 and beyond. And on March 11th, Pod Save America's Dan Pfeiffer will be here to discuss his new book, Untrumping America. And we're going to get a signed copy for you, Rick. So. As always, information about our other programming can be found on our website, politics.chicago.edu. After the discussion, we'll open the floor to take questions from the audience. Please line up behind the microphone in the center aisle. And remember, everyone is welcome at the mic, but we will prioritize the first three questions for students. And can we alternate men and women at the microphone as well? In terms of housekeeping, make sure your phones are on silent. The restrooms are downstairs. And there will be, after this program, a discussion about it over at our house, the IOP house at 5707 Woodlawn, for students. And I'm told that there will be dim sum associated with this. So if that makes it even more attractive to you, you should know that. And now to formally introduce our speaker is Claire Jackson. Claire is a second year from San Francisco. That's a second year student from San Francisco studying economics. This year she is the Pritzker Fellows Program intern here at the Institute of Politics. Please join me in welcoming Claire to the podium.
Good evening, everyone. It is my pleasure to introduce our event speakers for tonight, Bill Kristol, Rick Santorum, and Margaret Hoover. A conservative political analyst, Bill Kristol is a frequent commentator on several networks. He served in the Reagan and George H.W. Bush administrations before becoming the founder and editor-at-large of former political magazine, The Weekly Standard, and has been featured in a web program of the Foundation for Constitutional Government, Conversations with Bill Kristol, since 2014. Rick Santorum is a former Republican senator from Pennsylvania and was chairman of the Senate Republican Conference, the Senate's third-ranking Republican, from 2001 to 2007. His legislative proposals have encompassed religious freedom initiatives and the teaching of evolution and intelligent design. He has also written 4 books on conservatism. He has been a CNN political commentator since 2017. I am also very excited to introduce our visiting fellow, Margaret Hoover. Margaret is the host of PBS's Firing Line and a Republican LGBTQ activist. She is the best-selling author of American Individualism: How a Generation of Conservatives Can Save the Republican Party. Her writing has appeared in numerous newspapers and publications. She is currently a CNN contributor and president of the American Unity Fund, working to advance full equality for LGBTQ Americans. And now, without further ado, let's discuss the future of the American Republican Party.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Claire. Thank you, David. Thank you for bringing us here. And thank you all for being here. Who knew that in the middle of a university campus in Illinois, you would find so many people interested in the future of the Republican Party? It is the state of Lincoln, I will say. So in that vein, I think the best place to start is with the title of this discussion, Whose Party Is It Anyway? And I'd like to start with the premise that I will serve up to both of you and get your response to it, that right now, the Republican Party is the party of Donald Trump. That's whose party it is. Rick Santorum, Bill Kristol, agree or disagree? I'll go with you, Senator, first.
Yeah, but clearly, Donald Trump has refashioned the Republican Party into, certainly his policy image. I think most Republicans find themselves generally supportive of the direction the president's taking on the economy, even some of its non-conservative orthodox positions, for example, on trade and even on the deficit, or if you want to consider immigration from the economic perspective. That's always been a very divided issue among Republicans, but I think Trump has sort of won the day on those issues. I think he's been a pretty traditional conservative when it comes to the culture.
Can I just stop you there? Is there any issue that he hasn't won the day on?
Yeah, I think national security, he has not won the day among Republicans. I think there's a lot of Republicans who are concerned about his entreaties to North Korea and Turkey, those two in particular, even to some degree Putin. And I think there's look at the invasion of Turkey as an example. Trump basically gave a green light to Erdogan, which was reprehensible, and many Republicans, in spite of whatever blowback there was in the Congress and across, were very confrontational with the president. And I can tell you that religious conservatives, pastors, et cetera, really came down hard and heavy on him, and he sort of backed away. And I think it's still not a very, in my mind, not a cogent policy that he's got in that region, but he was chafed by that decision.
And yet, when you look at the polling in terms of the Republican Party self-identified Republicans, you have 85 to 95% of the party who identify with Trump and support Trump. Fair?
Yeah, I mean, look, he cut taxes, he deregulated the economy, he has appointed conservative judges. I mean, he's done things that conservative folks running for president have said a long time that they were going to do, and he's done them. And so I think there is a modicum of appreciation that he's willing to take political risks that a lot of Republican presidents in the past wouldn't do.
Okay, so before I go to Bill, because this is the question that I really want to get to the thrust of this question, is it seems to me like your defense of Trump or your support for Trump is grounded in a traditional understanding of what the conservative movement has always been. And you're suggesting, I think your argument is that he actually fits in that mold in terms of being a fiscal conservative, a social conservative, and an economic conservative?
Yeah, 80%.
80%, okay.
The old Reagan, 80%, someone who agrees with the 80%,
okay,
your friend, not your enemy.
So to Bill, you first, is the party of Trump? Is it Trump's party? Is the Republican Party Trump's party right now?
Well, before I give you the depressing answer to that question, let me say that it's good to be here with David and Margaret and Rick, three people I've agreed with and disagreed with at different times on different topics over the years, but all of three people I like and I've respected throughout our agreements and disagreements. It's also good to be here at the University of Chicago, with which I feel like I've had a long acquaintance or experience. I actually did not go here as an undergraduate, since I wanted to have fun as an undergraduate. It's just a joke, that's a joke. That's such a cliche by now, really, But my mother, my late mother, got her PhD in history here from 1942 to 1946, and 47 maybe, used to tell. So I grew up hearing many stories about Hyde Park and Chicago, and of course, therefore, didn't go here. No, I'm just kidding. Anyway, I have fond associations and have known many people who've taught here over the years and gone here over the years. So it's great to be here, and thank you for having me. No, it's Trump's party. And look, that's a big deal. I don't like it. I think Rick is under, this would be an interesting question. I think he's correctly stating that on many issues he's been sort of traditional, a traditional Republican or conservative. I would say the flip side of that, though, is that the spirit of the party on many questions of the rule of law and democratic norms and how politics should be conducted. He's quite different from, I think, the best traditions of the Republican Party. And for me, the big story, again, I don't like this, but leaving that aside, just analytically, as if one were a historian or a political scientist, you look at 2016, Trump wins the Republican nomination. Bernie Sanders does much better than anyone expects and gets, what did he get, about 43% of the vote when it was all in the Democratic primaries against Hillary Clinton. Right now, he's the front runner. I don't think he's a prohibitive or even definitive front runner, but he's the front runner for the Democratic nomination in 2020, so you can't very well say, well, that was just a weird one-off. I mean, if you have a Trump Democratic Party and a Trump Republican Party and a Sanders Democratic Party, that is a big change in American politics. I think it's a moment. People can say it's a good moment, it's a bad moment, it's an inevitable moment, it's, a disruptive moment, and who knows how it's going to work out. But I do think the party system that we've been familiar with, which was a fair, which stayed within boundaries in both sides, I would say, with occasional movements a little bit outside the boundaries, but pretty quickly reined in, where the party establishments were strong, where the party traditions were strong, where people usually won the nomination by saying they would more or less continue the good things that the previous president of their party had done, and would fight the bad things that the president of the other party had done. If you have a Trump Republican Party and a Sanders Democratic Party, we're in a new world, and I don't think it's a better world. I think it's a more European-style politics with a somewhat nativist and authoritarian conservative party and a socialist democratic, liberal party or left-wing party, which would be unfortunate for this country, I think. But I think it is a big moment. I don't think we can just go back to the past.
So that's what I'd actually like to get to, because leaving aside the standardization of the Democratic Party, do you like that? Standardization?
Standardization, yeah.
Standardization of the Democratic Party.
I mean, we've had a
Trumpification of the Republican Party. And just for people who haven't been in the weeds of the conservative movement as it's sort of morphed over the last 50 years, I think maybe Bill first and then Senator Santorum, how is Trumpism distinct from the conservatism that preceded it?
I mean, to be fair, the conservatism that preceded it had many strains and aspects, and social conservatism and economic conservatism, and there were fights among economic conservatives. There were hawkish conservatives, which Rick and I certainly were part of.
But for example, I saw Matt Gaetz last weekend, who used to be the kind of conservative that I wrote about in my book, which was essentially like the way Marco Rubio and Jeb Bush and Chris Christie and John Kasich were, right? Except for now, he corrected me. He's like, we're not conservatives anymore. We're populists.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. So I think conservatives have always been friendly to aspects of populism, and a lot of the success of Reagan and others was widening the tent, being less elitist or establishmentarian, but still suspicious of populism in the real sense of populism, of a kind of inciting of popular passions, willing to overrule norms and the rule of law for the sake of making populist appeals, making mean-spirited, I would say, and somewhat nativist appeals, just for the sake of riling people up to get them to your side. I think that's something the better aspects of the conservative movement have always rejected. But just put it more simply, look, Trump ran, think about this, in 2016, Trump ran against Romney, McCain, and Bush, the most recent nominees and the most recent president. He ran against many of their major policies and foreign policy, in other areas of politics as well. He personally disparaged them quite harshly, to say the least. That has not happened before, for better or worse. I mean, even Reagan in '80 was sort of respectful, you might say, of his Republican predecessors. And so Trump saw himself as hostile to the Republican establishment, and I think he was and is. And conservatism is a little more complicated, but I would say it's not an accident that what Matt Gaetz said to you, what he said. It isn't Bill Buckley's conservatism. It isn't really Reagan's conservatism. It isn't George W. Bush's conservatism. It isn't really Rick Santorum's conservatism of 2012 or 20 either, I don't believe. It is something new. I think it's something worse. But obviously, it is what it is.
Okay, so Senator, I'd love your take on the question of how Trumpism differs from the conservatism that preceded it in the two election cycles that you ran in, 2008 and 2012. You and I were talking earlier, and you suggested, and I think it's fair, that in many ways, 2012 and 2016.
Right.
Sorry. The viewpoints you espoused economically in 2015 when you were running preceded or were a precursor, and frankly, even as senator, the economic populism that has found itself embedded and entrenched in the Republican Party now?
Yeah, I mean, I tell the story all the time about, published a book after the 2012 election called Blue Collar Conservative. And it was in 2014. And when I was doing my publishing tour, I got a call from one of Trump's folks saying he wants to talk to you. He heard you on the radio talking about your book and he wants to talk to you. So a couple months later, I was in New York and I met with him. I walk into his office and sitting behind his desk, he's sitting there with a copy of my book, holding the book up, and he says, "I read your book." And
it's a lie. Forget about it.
So everybody laughs, and I said the same thing. I said, "The hell you read my book, right?" Because I said, "You didn't read my book." He said, No, I actually read your book." And so I said, "Okay." And so I sat there for 10, 15 minutes and quizzed him on my book because I just didn't believe it. But he obviously either read the book or had someone read it and do cliff notes and read the cliff notes. But he certainly got more than the gist of the book. And we talked for another half an hour about this is an agenda that the Republicans need to run on. And this is, he talked about China and he talked about immigration, he talked about trade. All of these, he talked about manufacturing and that he can relate to the manufacturing guy because he, built buildings here. And I mean, it was that kind of discussion. And so to address Bill's criticism, and I think it's a valid criticism of Trumpism, but I think he conflates two elements that are not necessarily elements that can be conflated going past Trump. And that is the element of Trump as Trump and the unique character of the man, which will never, in my opinion...
Character may not be the best choice.
Well, character in the sense of we all have character. Whether it's good or bad is up to you, but the character of the person, that is clearly, and is problematic. And I understand how it takes what is, I think, blue-collar conservatism and spikes it to a level that is uncomfortable for me to listen to. Even though I think I agree with many of the positions that the president espouses, I don't agree with the way he delivers a lot of those positions. And so I can understand that someone, again, conflates the two and says this is Trumpism. I would say that the policies undergirding Trump's agenda are good and defensible policies, and the way he presents them can be very offensive and very off-putting. I get that. But the question is, going forward, we're not going to have Donald Trump articulating those positions if we, in fact, move and decide as a party that we are going to be the party of working Americans. We're going to be the party of folks who are, middle America, if you will. And I say that because we already are the party of middle America. I believe that. And not that we get all the votes from middle America. We don't, particularly black and brown people. We don't. But I believe the policies can be and will be properly presented with the proper messenger, very attractive to people of all color. And so I'm of the belief that Trump is a transitional figure within the party that had to blow up the past to some degree and had to shock the consciousness of others to get attention. And now the question is whether we go back to sort of the old Republican norms, or whether we continue on the path of working toward a more economically populist approach as a party.
And I would just say that, so I think my difference is, I think Rick would like to have most of the policies that he likes without all the Trump characters, you put it, and rhetoric and demagoguery and vilification of others, and
it's a long list.
Attacking,
we
foreign service,
have an hour,
foreign
so
service,
move on to the next topic. So.
Military officers and foreign service officers who are serving the country and so forth. Okay, but I believe, so for me though, the most distressing thing has been is the way in which that has been normalized in the Republican Party. Trump does it and suddenly 100 Republican congressmen are doing it. I mean, literally, or 200, however many there were, 190 out of 197 are doing it. And the norms that Trump, if you told me that Trump is this weird transitional figure and after that there'll be kind of some new rebalancing of some of the populism with markets and some of the hawkish foreign policy with a little more Jacksonianism, and okay, that's a debate we can have then about where exactly that could go. But I'm very alarmed by the normalization of Trump-like behavior in the Republican Party, and people are they're not just grudgingly, you are grudgingly accepting it. That's not where the elected Republican officials are. That's where people who served in the administration for the first year or two were. They've all been gone, and they're now being purged, and we've got true believers in there. And I think the degree to which we have an illiberal, little L, party sense, we have an illiberal spirit in the Republican Party, for me, is very alarming.
And so, Bill, just to put a dot on it, what you're saying is the policies per se, you don't find, some of the policies you don't find as objectionable as the spirit in which they are pursued and the tenor of the rhetoric and the sort of resulting effect it has on our institutions.
That is, there's an economic argument. I don't think I quite agree with it, but there's an economic argument that, I would say immigration levels, legal immigration is going to be at some level or another, 1.5 million, 1.2, 0.9. It's ridiculous to pretend that it's written on stone somewhere that it has to be this number or that. But I think the spirit affects more than just people trying to say, oh, you don't like his style, you don't like his manners, he's a little crude. The spirit affects more than that. Montesquieu, just happened to do a conversation with Harvey Mansfield on Montesquieu, wrote a famous book, The Spirit of the Laws. The spirit is important. The spirit actually is more important often than the particular policy. And so I'm not willing to trade off slightly, better policies in this area or that area for a spirit that, in my opinion, really does damage to the civil and civic order, to the polity, to norms about the rule of law and decency in politics that are really important to preserve.
Here's my counter to that is simply this, that Donald Trump is a phenomenon based out of the fact that you had a large segment of the American public who felt that neither political party gave a damn about them. And they were angry about it. And you've seen politicians on both sides try to tap into that anger, and to some degree of success or another. Bernie Sanders is sort of tapping into that anger on the Democratic side. It's out there, and it is, in my opinion, the fact that we have seen a huge transformation of our culture and of the economy over the last 50 years, and a large swath of the American public. I wrote a chapter in my book that says a rising tide lifts all boats. Anybody know who said that first time, rising tide lifts all boats? John F. Kennedy, okay? Rising tide lifts all boats. You thought it was Ronald Reagan. No, it was John F. Kennedy. And he was talking, my chapter goes on and says, except as you have a hole in it. If you have a hole in your boat, a rising tide isn't a good thing, it's a scary thing. Because now you got to bail faster to keep your boat from sinking into dangerously high waters. And what people see in America is that you see a lot of people doing really, really well. And in fact, let's just objectively, the country is wealthier. I mean, the poorest person in America has a supercomputer in their back pocket, a cell phone. I mean, they have access to information, they have quality of life, even far beyond someone who 50 years ago was middle or upper income. So there's no reality that the quality of life, the material quality of life is better. But there's been so much change and dislocation, both economically and culturally, that people are unsteady and unsure. And both political parties are trying to tap into that now. What before it was, well, you're going to be okay. I mean, Democrats often talked about their big ticket issues. Republicans, all we focused on was economic growth and trying to raise the GDP. We didn't worry about whether that GDP was going down and actually helping everybody else. And the Democrats were off talking about climate and talking about big things that had nothing to do with ordinary people. Both parties seem to be talking over their heads. And now the result of that is that now both parties have recognized that anger and are voicing it. Now, Bill can say, well, that's Donald Trump. No, that's that group of people out there. That's the passion that they're feeling, just like Bernie is reflecting the passion on the other side. The question is, when are the political parties going to move off the harsh rhetoric and the, blaming billionaires for everything or blaming the swamp for everything on either side and get to a better place, a better dialogue, and I do believe that's more that's the transition that we're in right now.
No, just to counter Rick's counter, which I think is well said.
That's why we're here.
Yeah, no, well said, and I think frames the issue nicely. I would say this: the verb or the phrase tap into anger is sort of ambiguous, right? What does it mean exactly? Yes, people are angry on both sides. Trump and Sanders are, in my opinion, as very good, quite skillful demagogues, inciting even more of that anger. People are anxious about cultural and economic transformations. Trump and maybe the equivalent or not quite equivalent figures on the left are happy to play off those anxieties. That is bad for the country. And we shouldn't treat it as that, well, finally, like these parties have awakened. There used to be responsible political leaders who would try to damp down anger, damp down anxieties, tell people, look, it is going to be, there's nothing we can do about automation. We don't want to stop it. You just praised that little phone we have in our pocket. We're not really going to stop globalization and don't want to, I don't think. So we need to address some of the problems. We need to be responsible. We need to think about a little longer term perspective. It's not going to be easy. That was once the rhetoric, I'd say, of leaders of both parties to some degree. There was, God knows, always some demagoguery, some promising the sky, on both sides. But really, it's dangerous to have a populist politics in which both parties are trying, how can we best exploit the anger? How can we best exploit and even increase the anxieties and the discontent and the sense that other people are getting things that I'm not? There's always been some of that in politics. But it gets pretty dangerous when both parties, I very much agree on this, it's bad enough for one part. One reason I'm so opposed, and I'm trying to do my best to help my Democratic friends stop Sanders' victory on the Democratic side, is it's very bad if both parties go in this direction. It really has been good for America to have reasonable, civil, mainstream political parties. This was once the definition almost of American exceptionalism, And if you don't, maybe we'll come through this fine. Maybe that was always just kind of the establishments on left and right, kind of getting along with each other and patting each other on the back and ignoring the people, and we need this kind of wake-up call. But I think it's more dangerous, I guess, than Rick allows here. And I'm less confident that we kind of come through it without real leadership, and that leadership has to say no. It has to say no when Bernie Sanders really demagogues on a whole bunch of issues, and it has to say no when Donald Trump really demagogues on a bunch of issues, and especially when Donald Trump is the president. And that's why I don't think there's quite an equivalent. We are used to having demagogues. We're used to having Joe McCarthy's and George Wallace's and all kinds of people, Henry Wallace's. We're not used to having one as president. And we're used to people winning the presidency with somewhat demagogic campaigns, to be honest. But usually when they become president, they don't do that most of the time, or they do it on a couple of issues when they're over-promising on some piece of legislation. But when it's a serious moment in the country, they do think they have to damp down hatreds, damp down, reassure people about their anxieties, bring the country together. Trump has none of that. We have not gone through the experiment of having a president who sees his job as playing on anxieties, increasing hatreds, increasing discord before. Maybe we'll come through this fine, but I think it's a very risky experiment to run, and it has been risky for 3 years. It will be risky for another year. Extremely risky to have either second term of Trump or first term of Sanders, where all that stuff just continues in some ways.
I'd like you to respond, and then I'd like to sort of develop this a little bit more. I know, let him counter your counter to counter.
I've recognized we haven't really given you an opportunity to say.
No, look, this is about you guys. You're staying in your lanes. But do you have something to say in response, or?
Look, I think.
Actually, no, I'd like to understand, how do you counter this point of the demagogic instincts of Donald Trump? And does that sit well with, you're a person of moral leadership and character, and the notion that, how important is character at the highest, in the Oval Office? Yeah, look, I can argue with the extent or the degree that Bill assesses Trump's demagogic behavior. I don't think it's as severe as he's playing it out to be, but it is clearly, again, we can differ, but it is clearly new to the presidency. Maybe Andrew Jackson was like that. I've read a lot about Andrew Jackson, and the country survived Andrew Jackson, and I think the country will survive Donald Trump. I think the public looks at Donald Trump as the Donald Trump on The Apprentice. This was a huge personality that was well known. It was a brand that was well known in America prior to Donald Trump becoming Donald Trump. And so I just think that the danger, and I get it, he says those things and they bother me, but the danger of this somehow inciting a different America, or somehow reflecting a different, I just don't believe it. I think everybody sort of discounts
Donald Trump in his rhetoric and in his vilification of people as just the shtick that he's been doing for 25 years. And they sort of look past that. Again, I don't like it. I don't affirm it, but I don't think it's necessarily the great threat. And contrary to what you say, I mean, you say, well, you know, the discourse among Republicans has gotten a lot harsher. Look, the discourse that I've seen of Republicans being harsh is really a sort of a new phenomenon that they are more emboldened to push back on the press than they have been on the past. I don't think there's just a general coarsening of the discourse of Republican politics and members of Congress and the like. I think you've seen some of it in the area of relationship with the press, and I do think that Trump has emboldened them to sort of push back on an institution that they find fundamentally biased, and that's why they're pushing back as hard as they are. So again, I don't see a systemic problem here that can't be the ship can't be righted once we get past this personality in the office.
Okay, so I want to take it from there because you have referred, Senator Santorum, to President Trump's presidency as transitional, right? Like this is just going to be a transitional moment, and then the Republican Party will stand for a certain set of ideas.
But I mean, he has changed the party.
No question. No question. I think all three of us agree on that. I just have a few questions about like what is that party going to stand for, and where are the constituencies that were part of the conservative movement beforehand, the thing that Republicans, everybody knows Republicans were for before, where does that go? And I just want to ask you both. I mean, you know, I think about fiscal conservatism, right? Caring about debts and deficits, caring about our keeping our fiscal house in order. That doesn't seem to be a core part of Trumpism.
I'd agree.
Does that have a home in the Republican Party in the future?
I mean, look, I'm someone who pushed for a balanced budget amendment. I got hammered by my colleagues when I went after Senator Mark Hatfield, who was a Republican. We had, believe it or not, back in 1995, the House had passed a balanced budget amendment to the Constitution that would require a balanced budget going forward, and the Senate had 12 or 13 Democrats that voted for that amendment, and one Republican switched his vote the day before, and we lost.
That was Hatfield?
That was Mark Hatfield from Oregon. And I went after him. I mean, I went after him on the floor. This guy had been in office 30 years. I've been in office 30 days, I think. And so my colleagues came down on me and, you know, how dare you do this? But I saw that as a moment in time.
Values, then.
I saw that as a moment in time because, let's be honest, I mean, Ronald Reagan was not a great guy on deficits. And George Bush, I remember talking to George Bush about this, George W. Bush, talking about this after 9/11, and we saw these deficits go up, and his response was, "We're at war, I'm not worried about deficits." And so there's always been an excuse for Republicans not to be concerned about deficits as much as we said we cared about them. And so I still care about them. I still think they're problematic. I still think we're going to pay a price. Maybe it's 10 years from now, maybe it's 50 years from now, where we're going to have massive, we're going to have to, have massive inflation of the currency to handle this debt, and it's going to be cataclysmic for some future generation. But in the meantime, we're just sort of floating along, and frankly, neither party seems to care about it.
Well, but the Republicans have completely given up on it.
We used to talk about it, never do anything. We used to talk about it. Now neither party talks about it. So I'm not sure that's a win for either.
Anything to add there, Bill? Because I could just go to healthcare with you. So, one of the things Republicans rallied around that helped elect Donald Trump, and we hammered on for years, was overturning the Affordable Care Act, fixing healthcare. The Republican Party, this seemed to be a unifying theme in the Republican Party, right? Whatever sort of faction you were from, as soon as we got the House, the Senate, and the presidency together, we would finally fix the Affordable Care Act. Hat tip to you, David Axelrod. Where is a post-Trump Republican Party, and what kind of credibility does it have on anything related to one of the major issues facing the electorate right now?
If you permit, because I've been working on this leading a working group at what we call the consensus group, trying to get a conservative proposal on health care. And And we have one. We have one that's actually been scored by a nonpartisan group that actually.
Where was it in 2016?
It wasn't there in 2016. It's as a result of the failure. Look, Paul Ryan and Mitch McConnell didn't think Donald Trump was going to win, didn't think they had any, all they could do is continue to demagogue the issue of being against something and not for anything. And when they got it thrown in their lap, they didn't know what to do. They had no plan. And some of us tried to come up there with an idea that I think would have passed. We didn't get paid attention to, and they lost. We've since subsequently put this together, but let me just give you an update. I mean, I'm still banging my head against the wall in the Senate and in the House and at the White House to try to get them to adopt a plan and actually be for something. Nobody wants to be for anything because they believe the better politics of this is being against socialized medicine or being against Medicare for all. That's great. I mean, I think Medicare for all will ultimately be not a winning issue for the Democrats in the fall. But the idea that we have a chance of winning the presidency, and depending on who they nominate, maybe winning the House and the Senate, being in the same position we were in 2016, and still not have a plan. And more importantly, you even have a plan in your back pocket that you haven't campaigned on it, you haven't delivered a message as to what it's about, you haven't socialized this among the American public and tried to get some feedback. I know there's downside to that because people can pick apart your plan, but there's also something called a mandate that, hey, I ran on this, and I want to get this done. And Republicans, to my knowledge, and well, not to my knowledge, I know because I'm involved in these meetings, they don't want to do it. And I think this is malpractice. And so you have every right to condemn Republicans on health care.
Bill, is Donald Trump a transitional figure that has realigned the Republican Party and sort of brought it closer towards an economic populism with some combination of strong national defense sort of centered around America first, however you take that, and sort of recentering around traditional values in some new, more modern way? Or has he corrupted and permanently damaged the Republican Party, in your view?
I mean, we'll see, obviously. I'm very worried about the much more lasting effects of Trump and Trumpism. I'm not as impressed by, I mean, he happens to have done some things that are in accord with traditional conservative policy positions, some of which were sound, some of which maybe should have been rethought, but whatever. But I don't know that that's laying the groundwork for any lasting sort of serious thinking about policy. I mean, it could, you never know. Things are, you get one person gets followed by another, and it could be quite a different type of person with different ideas. When I came to, Pat Moynihan said, I worked for back when I was, last time I voted for a Democrat for president, which was in 1976. I had been working for Pat Moynihan, and I voted for Scoop Jackson in the Democratic primary in Massachusetts, part of my very successful career of supporting winning candidates, which, I then voted for Ford in the general election, so I had voted for every Republican in the general election until 2016. But Moynihan, whom I liked very much, said, I think in 1981, 1982, before I came to Washington, all of a sudden, the Republican Party is the party of ideas. And I think that's what excited me to come to Washington in '85. I know it's what excited a young Pennsylvania politician named Rick Santorum to very successfully win, upset a Democratic state senator and then a Democratic representative, I think. Is that right?
Congressman and U.S. Senator.
Congressman and senator, and in Democratic area of the state at that point. And that was, whatever the merits of some of these ideas, some of them turned out to be not quite as good as we thought. Some of them needed modifications. Some of them had gotten stale, frankly, over the next 10 or 20 years. That's a fair criticism. But, I mean, you look at the Republican Party now, and here I really do think it's permeated. I mean, the first couple of years of Trump, I thought, I don't feel like a lot of these Republicans in the Congress, they don't really sound quite like Trump. I know a lot of them. I know a lot of the class of 2014. A lot of them are pretty impressive. I don't feel, I'll just take one name, even Elise Stefanik, who I knew quite well, but she had worked with me, and she worked with you. But she worked with me on foreign policy stuff. She was a Reagan, McCain, I would say, foreign policy Republican, and a very good person.
Youngest woman to be elected to Congress at the time she was elected.
Youngest woman to be elected, and so forth. And then, I thought, okay, look, maybe the Trump thing is kind of more what Rick is saying, transitional, and there's an sort of a substructure that will go, some very good Republican governors doing good things. I can't really honestly say that anymore, which is why I really am uncertain about what the future of the party is, or whether it's a party I could even really be part of, because I just think it's not a party that's interested in constructive maybe we'll become that again, but the degree to which the members have now just decided, I mean, being a Trumpist is the winning thing to be in the Republican Party right now. And if you actually said, as a member, what Rick Santorum is saying up here, and I think Rick would not disagree with this, you would get hammered. I mean, you say one sentence that's contrary to Trump, you get hammered. Rick told the story about himself.
You got hammered by the president himself.
But you know what's crazy? So fine, so he got hammered by Mark Hatfield and the Republican establishment. He survived. He was a senator for the next 11 years. He didn't go, oh my God, people are Bob Dole and Mark Hatfield are mad at me. The degree to which they're all unbelievably timid and pathetic, even people who are retiring won't speak up, I mean, and who have retired won't speak up. And that tells me that the whole thing is honestly just more rotten than I would have thought possible. And I don't, and the kinds of people, I know so many people who are not running for young people, 30, 35-year-olds, a fair number of them 9/11 veterans, others involved in some other civic and volunteer activities, some at home, some abroad, who kind of Republican-ish, conservative-ish, maybe not so much on some of the social issues, but those are maybe passed by in terms of marriage and so forth. So very eager to actually get into politics and either serve in administration or run for office. They're all,
They'll never do it as
I go to New York, I have dinner with like 10 of them. They're all in New York. They don't want to be in Washington. They don't want to serve in this administration. They don't want to run for office. And the first question is, well, do you agree with Trump or not? And you say, well, I'm kind of conservative, and I don't really want to be, I think markets work and limited government's important. But then what do you think about Trump? And they don't want to have to run in a primary and say they're not enthusiastic for Trump. So the pipeline of interesting, younger, forward-looking conservative candidates, I think, is drying up in a very big way, and I think it's happening down to the college campus level in terms of who's actually involved in, different Republican efforts. I hope not here at Chicago, where, but it's easier maybe to be a college Republican who's not pro-Trump than it is to be an actual. But even there, the pressure is so great, and so that and the capitulate. But I don't care about the pressure. Fine, presidents put on pressure, grassroots people put on pressure, donors put on pressure. It's the capitulation to the pressure that really, for me, raises almost a kind of moral question about the character of the current Republican Party.
Just a 30-second rebuttal on that. And look at what happened with impeachment in the United States Senate. Almost every Republican senator, not all of them, I agree. There's some who adopted the, it was a perfect call and nothing was wrong and everything. But the vast majority of the Republicans who voted with Trump on impeachment were critical of him and what he did in that situation. And go read their speeches. They're on the floor of the Senate. I mean, it's in the public record. They said it, and they said it publicly. So the idea. Oh,
come on! How many said he's firing half the national intelligence staff?
That's fine.
Career. How many are saying, Mr. President, this isn't? You gotta keep some professionals in there. It can't be the case that you testify on the Hill and you say something that you don't like and you get fired. How many spoke up for Vindman or Bill Taylor or people
for Vindman's brother?
I mean, it really is kind of pathetic.
Well, look, I mean, I'm sorry. I mean, I think the president has a right to have people around him who actually he can trust and feels like they're not trying to undermine him. I do.
You don't deny the sort of the real effect of the bullying. For example, let me just take the example of Representative Matt Gaetz, who is like as Trumpist as they come. He's absolutely in his corner. He has
Why are you obsessed with Matt Gaetz? You're like,
here's why. Because he's like the one guy from Florida who says, I didn't come to Congress to argue with a thermometer. Like, he's the only one in Congress on the Republican side who acknowledges climate change, right? But he differs from the president because on the War Powers Act.
Right.
And Trump goes after him personally on Twitter, through the White House, everything. And the guy he's in the doghouse now. There is no room for
he's not in the doghouse. He got out of the doghouse by sucking up to Trump. That's worse. That's what's so terrible.
Trump will never forget. No. But Trump will never forget that
Who cares about Trump? They should have enough self-respect to care about themselves, not about Trump.
I'm just telling you that I think members of Congress are learning that that you can, and they are. You can speak up against the president. Matt Gaetz is a good example, and yeah, he'll come after you, he'll hammer you. And then it's off to the next thing. I mean, it's not like he can fire them, and he's not going to fire them.
Well, no, but he can actually.
I mean, let's look at another example. Jeff Sessions.
He can mount a primary
He fired
session?
Jeff Sessions. The Attorney General.
Yeah.
Jeff Sessions is running for Senate in Alabama.
Who's going to get that nomination?
Okay, now hold on. So Jeff Sessions is running for Senate in Alabama. Did Donald Trump go out there and go after him in Alabama? No, hasn't said a word.
Yeah, you know why?
You know why? Because he's going to win.
No, because he showed up on Fox News and said, I love the president. I couldn't help myself but support the president. I'm so grateful for the president.
Jeff Sessions.
Yeah, but he did. That's the first thing he did. That's the first thing he did.
Time out. Jeff Sessions was one of the key closest allies of the president. One of the first, I think he was the first senator to endorse him.
The most loyal senator.
And like me, is of the blue collar conservative ilk, if you will.
For sure.
And so he's going to stand up and say, you know, there's no one's going to be more for Trump on policy than I am. You know why? Because a lot of the policies are his policies. So to say that sucking up to him is just not fair.
But we know,
he's articulating
but Senator, I think what we all know, right, because we understand how this works behind the scenes, is that Sessions has done all the blocking and tackling and back-channeling with the White House as is possible to keep the president not focused on it, so he doesn't weigh in. Because, by the way, he might not win that primary.
Hold on. He might not win he's going to win the primary, but I was just down there. So, look, the bottom line is, I talked through this with Jeff when he was making the decision. Jeff and I are very good friends, and he actually went into this thinking that the president very well might come after him, and he was going to do it anyway because he thought that the policies that the president were putting forward needed to have a voice in the Senate, and there weren't that many people who actually agreed, again, to Bill's point, or made a counter Bill's point, that actually agree with a lot of the things the president is doing. There's still a lot of folks who say, oh, Trump has sold them. I don't believe that Trump has sold them on a lot of these things. There's still a lot of folks who have concerns about it and are getting through this Trump era. Sessions is one who believes it. Having said that, the president is not attacking him. And if he doesn't attack, he's not going to.
Wait till that 3 a.m. tweet.
He's not
For me, the problem is that
happen.
the one, I guess, likely Republican pickup in 2020 is not going to be a forward-looking, interesting 37-year-old with fresh ideas. It's going to be a 79-year-old guy was in the Senate for 30 years and then was an attorney general who surprised people by standing up on some key issues to the president, to his credit, and others not so much. And then he gets fired, and now he's going to go. This is what the Republican Party is. It's like Jeff Sessions coming back to the United States Senate. Is that really a party that's got a vision for the future?
So we need to move to Q&A, but we're going to also get in the Q&A to sort of what the party, who's going to succeed Trump, and who's going to move the party forward after Trump is gone, because it may be soon, and it may be in another 4 years. But let's take the first 3 questions from students, and we're going to alternate male-female because there's a male first. Hi.
Senator Santorum, my name is Daniel. I'm an American Jew, and I am truly terrified because since Trump's election, anti-Semitic violence has skyrocketed. President Trump calls Jewish Democrats disloyal, while the Republican Party as a whole spreads conspiracy theories about George Soros. My siblings have been gunned down in synagogues because of your party's incitement. So, Senator Santorum, will you condemn white nationalism and anti-Semitism in the Republican Party?
Well,
I think that's good.
With all due respect, I just reject the premise that Republicans are white nationalists or anti-Semites. Do I condemn any form of white nationalism, anti-Semitism? Absolutely, whether it's coming from the left or the right. So there's no room for it in America. So that's not the issue. But the premise is that somehow or another that Republicans are behind this anti-Semitic rise in anti-Semitism, where unfortunately, and it is unfortunate, that you're seeing anti-Semitic behavior in both extremes of both parties. And you see it a lot.
The shooters cite President Trump's rhetoric as their motives.
I'm going to cut you off, and I'm going to refer you to a Firing Line episode, which is coming up, where Bari Weiss is my guest. She has written a book called How to Fight Anti-Semitism. She categorizes the rising incidences of anti-Semitism that you highlight. She was not baptized. She was bat mitzvahed in the Tree of Life Synagogue, and does a really great job of characterizing how anti-Semitism needs to be fought both on the left and on the right. And I applaud your highlighting this issue. It is an important issue, and we all condemn anti-Semitism and white nationalism. Thank you for your question. Next.
Hi, I'm Isabel. I'm a first year in the college studying public policy. What I've noticed is I actually think Republicans and Democrats can get behind key economic issues, even if there is disagreement in trade or healthcare. But I feel like, you know, among establishment, people really want what's best. Like, both parties claim that they are behind the working man. And I was just wondering, I think what divides us most is more in social values. And I was wondering, for 2020 and, you know, post-Trump, what are the social values the Republican Party is going to run on? And is it going to be something that unites Americans together, or is it going to be kind of preying on our fears? And I wanted to know, what are the strategies behind that going forward?
So I want to let both of you answer that, and I'd also like to build on your question, if you could, in the answer. There's this premise that the Republican Party has gotten whiter and more rural and older, and that some people in the Republican Party believe we need to have a bigger tent on social issues, to your point, reaching out to people of color more, to really actively try to grow the tent. And then there are some people who thought, nope, we've got enough voters as they are, we just got to get them all to the polls. We're good with white, rural, or older voters as long as we can get them all to show up. So please address this question about sort of what are the social values that a future Republican Party is going to have, but also what do the voters of a future Republican coalition need to look like in order for it to be a winning coalition?
Yeah, look, I don't accept the fact that the values that the Republican Party stands for are white values. I mean, I think that people of all color share the position I share on abortion, the position I share on marriage. In fact, there may be actually a higher percentage of certain minorities that agree than whites on some of these issues. So the idea that this breaks out, that this is sort of old white people who share these values,
well, that is the core of the Republican Party.
It is, but it's not because of these cultural issues. In fact, I would make the argument that on a lot of the cultural issues, the opportunity for us is actually in the minority communities that in many cases continue to share those values. Don't vote for Republicans, don't get me wrong, they don't, or a lot of them don't, but they don't necessarily disagree with us on the issue of abortion, let's say. And so Look, I don't see the Republican Party, I mean, and I will certainly do everything I can to fight any kind of change on those bedrock issues. I do believe that we have to be, and I think we're working at that, we have to be a lot tonally better in making sure that when we take these positions, that we do so respectfully, and we do so saying that, you know, we believe in equality, we believe in the dignity of every human person, that we have a different point of view on what, you know, when life begins, and we have a different point of view on what marriage means and the significance of that in society. But that doesn't mean that we don't respect people who have different points of view.
Bill?
I mean, for many reasons, sociological, demographic, economic, geographical, I guess, I mean, the parties are more different from each other than they have traditionally or historically been. Maybe not, there have been other times in American history where parties, and certainly in certain regions, where parties have been as distinct from each other. That's not necessarily a good or bad thing. I mean, the country can work in that way, but it does put a special burden on leaders of each party, especially when they become president or when they become senator or governor, to try not to simply represent their 46% or even 52 or even 60% of the country. I mean, and again, I think most elected officials for most of the time in both parties have had that sense and have tried to almost go out of their way to find something where they could work, you know, with people from the other party to show that we're not just representing our constituents. Trump really does not think that way. I mean, literally just thinks that he represents the people who voted for him and the people who didn't vote for him but could be gotten to vote for him, not by persuasion, but by sort of rallying them, literally rallying them, so that more of them come out to vote. So there's zero persuasion in the Trump president. Now, democracy, I don't want to be all high-minded and University of Chicago-like here and, you know, think that democracy is all about deliberation and persuasion and there's never been a pure amount of just rallying your troops and getting them to turn out and getting them more excited. Obviously, that's a large part of democratic politics, or any politics, and some of it's good, actually. But I think the degree to which we have a total abandonment of that on the Republican side with Trump, and again, and on the Democratic side, frankly, to a large degree with Sanders, Now, again, but it's different because Trump is the president. So you can do it as a candidate, but then usually you move beyond it. But even as a candidate, think of the degree to which people have tried to reassure, to calm the waters at key times. And there's just none of that with Trump as president. So that's again, it comes back to our difference about how serious, I suppose, one should take that side. But the total collapse of deliberative or persuasive discourse in Congress, in our national public square, from the White House, that's what's really striking. Yesterday, the president, I didn't see it, but the president had this press conference. Now, look, there's no partisan view on how to handle a public health, crisis and what these are tough trade-offs and these difficult issues. It's a moment for a president to look presidential in a very old-fashioned way, to have serious physicians and public health experts and others come up and reassure the country that we're going to do our best. There'll be, no one gets everything perfectly right in these crises, but let's be serious about it. And Trump just can't resist in the middle of this very event, attacking his enemies and the media and I don't know, God knows what else. And that's, okay, that's not just tonal, that is really bad. And therefore what do we have? Conservative talk radio, either saying it's not real, it's a fake crisis being manipulated by Trump's enemies, or maybe it was even caused by somehow Trump's enemies. You really are running a risk when the whole public discourse becomes so conspiratorial, so alarmist and willing to just say anything about the people on the other side. And I do think that, for me, that's what's most alarming about this moment.
Can I just really quick, because I think really, if I'm reading between the lines, your question was really, look, I understand we're talking to a college audience, and I think social issues are the gateway drug to politics, right? Like, social issues are the issues that sort of often animate younger people most, and I think what you were asking is, what are the social issues, or what are the positions on social issues that the next Republican president or next Republican candidate for president is going to support?
And they're going to be the same as this Republican candidate?
I'm going to tell you, I think they're going to be entirely dependent on who the nominee is and who ends up taking the mantle from Trump, and that will be a very, very different formula of positions if it's Nikki Haley, or if it's Mike Pompeo, or if it's Tom Cotton, or if it's Mike Pence. And I think it's entirely dependent on leadership. And who is the person that ends up carrying that mantle? Remember, Nikki Haley, when she gave the response to one of President Obama's State of the Unions, said we're going to be a party that represents many different kinds of families. And that was sort of a hat tip to this notion that there are now same-sex families. That's not going to be the position of a Tom Cotton or a Mike Pence or a Mike Pompeo.
I mean, don't you think the marriage issue is done? I mean, no one is going to reverse marriage equality. That's just not going to happen. No one's even going to run.
I don't know. Let's ask the candidate.
Wait a second. I'm just saying. I don't really even buy. It's dignifying Trump and Trump's rhetoric too much to say that he's serious about the social issues. He's not serious about any of the social issues. He's gone along with the consensus position of the Republican Party, which is a pro-life position, which I agree with, and I think that issue will work itself out in both the courts, and maybe if it gets kicked back to state legislatures, and we'll end up with a mixed verdict if it goes back to state legislatures. Obviously, many states, Illinois, California, New York, will maintain legalized abortion. Other states won't. Maybe it'll stay in the courts in the sense that Roe v. Wade will be upheld. I rather think that will happen even with Trump judges. But whatever will happen there will happen there. People are entitled to argue about it. But Trump is not interested in actual social issues. Trump is interested in cultural, in a culture war, or sort of almost fake culture war, but he's not even interested in the real cultural questions. He's interested in Colin Kaepernick kneeling for the national anthem. I mean, the degree to which, therefore, serious people who want to make a pro-life case, I find this personally, I don't know if you find this, are disadvantaged by the fact that the president exploits that issue is also a problem, I think.
Well, I don't agree with that, but to get to your question, look, I think what conservatives want, what Republicans want, is really what Bill alluded to, which is that we don't want 9 members of our society deciding what the cultural norm should be in our country, and that this should be a decision that is made by the public and made either nationally, if there can be a national movement one way or the other, to push through the legislative process, or state by state, which I think would happen. I hope that Roe versus Wade is overturned. I hope that the marriage issue is overturned. I hope that the public has a debate and a discussion about what the consequences are of these policies, and then make a decision. I'll advocate for one thing, others will advocate for another, but what we'll have, I mean, this is the problem with rule by the courts. is you have a whole group of people who feel like they have been banned from participating and advocating for positions that they feel very deeply about. Imagine if we came forward and said, no, we're gonna ban we're gonna ban abortions and have 9 people decide that there will be no abortions and we're gonna prosecute people. The court decided this. There'd be an outrage. Well, now imagine the shoes on the other foot, because that's what happened in 1973. So neither is good for society, because I remember, you go back and read the articles after 1973. Oh, this issue's over. In a generation, this issue will not even be talked about. The court has decided and finally put this issue to bed. False. This issue never is going to be put to bed until when? Until the public makes a decision.
Well, this issue,
you
mean Roe v. Wade and abortion. I just want
Right.
to point one. We're going to go to the next question. I can't not say this, and it's that the issue of marriage and LGBTQ equality and abortion are not linked, I think, in the context of the social conservatives and frankly Republicans. If you look at public opinion polling about Roe v. Wade and abortion since 1973, 1974 until now, it has essentially remained the same. You don't have a majority of the country that has steadily upticked saying we support abortion or we're against abortion, but you do, since the 2015 decision that made legal same-sex marriage, have a solidly trending upward line of people supporting same-sex marriage in every age demographic and at every racial demographic. And so they are very different issues, I think. And so I think at least on the LGBTQ equality issue, I think quite likely that a Republican ends up support full equality.
It doesn't change the point I'm trying to make, which is fine. Then what are you afraid of? Then let's just give it back, get it out there, let the public make a decision. If you're going to win, win. But don't disenfranchise me. Don't take away my voice that I can go out there and go to my legislature or go to my city council and actually advocate for something that I think is the right thing to do. And that's what the courts have done. They muzzled a whole generation of people, and conservatives, frankly, are sick of it. They're sick of courts basically saying, we're going to be the moral compass for the country, and everybody else shut up. That builds hostility, that builds confrontation, and it's not healthy for anybody, particularly if in your case, and I think you're right, you're on the winning side. Why do you want that? Why do you want the pall hanging over this issue?
I think the tension ends up becoming less because support ends up increasing. But anyway, let's go to the next question.
Hi, my name is Grant Stiles. I wanted to start off by saying, as per the name of the event, I feel like the Republican Party should move more towards a conservative libertarian aspect. And even recently, I feel like the Republican Party has been more inclusive of, for example, LGBT people. And yeah, I mean, you can laugh, but it's true. LGBT people, people of different races. I feel like it's become more of an inclusive party in many ways. So on that note, I do want to see more of a libertarian Republican Party. But my question is for Bill Kristol. I wanted to ask, when you left the Republican Party, like, I understand that you had some difficulties with it. You didn't like the rhetoric of the president. But why not just become an independent instead of going to the Democrat Party, which is increasingly accepting progressivism and leftism? Why wouldn't you try reforming your own party even more so instead of fighting this fight of Bernie Sanders versus the moderate Democrat?
So, I mean, we don't have party registration in Virginia, which allows me to truthfully say that I really haven't been a party person. I mean, I came to Washington to work in Republican administrations and mostly supported Republican candidates. As I say, voted Republican until 2016 at the national level. Most of the time, not every single time, at the state and local level. No, look, my basic, having served in Republican administrations, having been associated with the Republican Party, I thought the best thing I could try to do in 1917, 18, and 19 was to encourage a non-Trump, a Trump challenger in the Republican Party, non-Trump candidates for Congress in the Republican Party, showings of independence from Trump by Republicans in Congress and elsewhere, get Republican donors to say that, look, we're not interested in this kind of Trumpy republicanism. I was a total failure in that. And though I am pretty stubborn and will keep on failing for a while, at some point you've got to say Joe Walsh and Bill Weld are not going to be the Republican nominee for president. There was not going to be more than one Republican. We fought hard on the impeachment stuff, but there was not going to be more than one Republican vote for either impeachment or conviction. There was not going to be any appreciable Republican rebellion on almost anything. If there is, I'm happy to work with them, and I still do talk to people, obviously. And so I said, I've not joined the Democratic Party, but I said effectually until November 3rd, 2020, I guess at the national level at least, with all the obvious caveats, I guess I'm a Democrat now. Now, I did, but one reason, therefore, I am so interested in the Democratic nominee not being Bernie Sanders is I really do think it's important. I think I would prefer to have a responsible Democrat, much, much, much prefer to an irresponsible Democrat as the Democratic nominee. I actually think it's really important for the country. Now, maybe I'm wrong. People are certainly free to differ. Many of you probably do. But that's why I've sort of, it's not because I'm just sick of the Republicans and it's more fun to play around with Democrats. I really think it is, a Trump-Sanders race for me is really bad for America. Maybe I'll be proven wrong. Maybe it's just a moment. Maybe we'll get past it. Maybe maybe either a second term of Trump or a first term of Sanders won't be as bad as I think. It's an interesting question. Which of those will be worst? I'm a little more, well, it's a serious question, though. I mean, you know, a friend of mine said, well, I sort of tend to think the second term is often worse than the first term because the first term is not as effective. An unleashed Trump in a second term with a vindication of re-election, I do think that's something I don't want to see. But I would really also prefer not to see a Sanders presidency in a first term, and I can live with a Biden presidency, a Klobuchar presidency, a Buttigieg presidency, and I don't think that'll do a heck of a lot of damage, or won't do unacceptable damage to our country, to our democracy, or to our leadership position in the world. So that's really what motivated me. I guess that's more than you need to know. But I mean, that's why I do care about the Democratic nomination, not because I'm just like enjoying playing around with Democrats, though they are, some of them, fun people, you know, but more fun than Republicans, if we can be honest.
Totally.
But yeah, Margaret and I will admit that, but even Rick will admit that privately. But because I think a Trump-Sanders race is bad for this country. That's something we've never had. It would be like having a Goldwater-McGovern race, you know, without having an alternative who was more reasonable in either case.
Let's go to the next question.
Great, thanks. Thanks so much for coming, guys. I'm Shannon, Harris Lum, Booth student currently. So what changes to the primary process, if any, do you think would lead to a more civil nomination and election process, ideally even better downstream outcomes for the American people? And of the changes that you think would be ideal, which do you think are actually feasible?
Yeah, I don't believe that the changes that I'm hearing about, whether you go to regional primaries or you get rid of Iowa, New Hampshire, and all those, that would result in a better nominating process. In fact, I believe starting out in small states gives candidates that are like a Pete Buttigieg or like a Barack Obama. Well, Obama was a bigger name, but or like a Rick Santorum. An opportunity to meet enough voters and to connect with voters and launch a campaign. And look, it happened with Jimmy Carter. It's happened with other candidates. So I think the idea of going to a big state or going to a bunch of states early, I think the Democrats are going to rue the day that they did Super Tuesday with 40% of the votes coming up after the first four. Because if Bernie had to sustain this, state after state, I mean, when I ran in 2012, I competed in 30 states. We started January 3rd. Iowa was January 3rd. And I dropped out middle of April and did 30 states. But that was over 3+ months. And we had a Super Tuesday, which I think there were 11 states or something like that, Super Tuesday, but no, other than Ohio and Georgia, most of the states were, North Dakota and a lot of smaller states. Having these big states, it sets it up for a Mike Bloomberg. It sets it up for a Tom. It sets it up for people who have a lot of money, and Amy's not going to have a shot. She doesn't have any money. Pete's not going to have. She doesn't have enough money to compete in that kind of primary. So if Bernie had to run every week a new primary, and so you could go there, you could campaign, you could focus all your energy and resources, do well. That's what I did. Raise and spend it all. Hopefully you do well. Raise enough, then go to the next one until you hopefully build up enough that you can win this thing. You're going to have the best funded candidates. I just think it's rich for the Democrats to get out there talk about, Citizens United and all this stuff, and yet Elizabeth Warren's using a super PAC, which is what would have been banned by Citizens United, to compete against a billionaire. The reality is that a slower, steadier process is what is painful to many. It draws things out for many, but it's a process that allows for changes and lets the party and lets the public react. The other thing I would do, and I know this is anti-democratic and that's Democrat Party democratic, but it's a disaster, and that's early voting in a presidential primary. I mean, you have people voting in states, 3 weeks ago, before any of the primaries that started, and they're voting for people who aren't on the ballot anymore. They're voting for people who have since come and dropped. There's plenty of opportunities for people to vote if you limit it to the week before. And I can understand in a general election or in a normal primary where early voting makes sense. I mean, the candidates are known. But in a presidential primary where you have candidates going up and down and disappearing from the ballot and having people vote a month early, that just skews the results and causes problems. So if there's any changes I'd make, I'd string it out more, and I'd eliminate voting up until the week before the election in each state.
Let's take another question.
Hey, so this is more a question for Santorum because it kind of agrees with Bill's point, but we had this guy, Tom Rooney, congressman from Florida until 16, at the IOP for lunch every week last quarter. It was really cool. And one thing he brought up again and again was that a lot of his counties, Democrats have the Jackson, Johnson, whatever dinner, and the Republicans have the Lincoln dinner. They don't have the Lincoln dinner anymore. They have the Trump dinner, which you didn't do that for Reagan, didn't do it for the Bushes. Lincoln's like the best president. And so like, how can you say that Trump is like a transitional figure if the foundational dinner that you're going to at the Republican Party involved is the Trump dinner?
Yeah, I can tell you, I've done Lincoln Day dinners. We still have Lincoln Day dinners in Pennsylvania. We don't have Trump dinners in Pennsylvania, and many of them are called Lincoln Reagan dinners. They're not just called Lincoln dinners; they're called Lincoln Reagan dinners. So that may happen in some counties. I can't speak for them, but I would vehemently object to that.
Well, I guess I'm the last question. Thank you so much for coming out tonight. I'm Laura, a fourth year in the college, and I was interested on what the new Republican platform going forward would look like when it comes to climate change, just because there is a lot of division within the party of whether it's existing, whether it's human caused, and even just going along with the climate change more from a national security energy angle, like what is the future of renewable energy for this Republican Party going forward?
If you had a blank slate, Bill Kristol, to contrive what the Republican position on climate change would be, how would you do it?
I would go back to the earlier question. There are a lot of issues where I would say there's a perfectly accessible centrist agenda on something like climate, which recognizes the reality of climate change, which tries to handle it in an economically intelligent way and in a realistic way with carbon taxes and other incentives, and also perhaps use government in the way we've traditionally used government, in a sort of Hamiltonian way, to encourage innovation and to reward innovations that are, in which to put it in economic terms, the externalities are positive, let's produce public goods, without getting into Green New Deal sort of fantasies on the one hand, or without denying climate on the other. Since it's the last question, I will say I am very uncertain, totally uncertain about the future of the Republican Party. Someone who's pretty uncertain about the future of the Democratic Party, pretty uncertain about the future of the two-party system. I really think in a way that I wouldn't have said for most of my political career that it is quite possible, and it's hard to know, depending on what happens in this nominating process on the Democratic side and then in this election, that things will look wildly different 2, 3, 4 years from now. I do feel like in that respect, Trump-Sanders is a big moment. Maybe it's a moment where we just have these two European-style parties. But as someone said to me, I was making this point that I don't like this Europeanization of American politics, the sort of authoritarian nativism on the one hand and a kind of demagogic, I would argue, socialism on the other. And someone pointed out to me, well, at least in Europe, they do have all those parties. They also usually have a centrist party that often governs. So it's one thing to have two totally irresponsible parties if they're usually at least not going to be in power or have to be in a coalition with a more responsible party. We have achieved a fantastic trick here in America of having potentially two really irresponsible parties with nothing in between. And that's why I really wonder after November 3rd, 2020, whether there isn't a possibility for a real reshuffling of the deck in American politics, and maybe it could be a very hopeful moment, actually, in this rather otherwise, I find, dark moment. But as my friend John McCain used to say, it's always darkest before it turns pitch black. So.
All right, Senator Santorum, your rebuttal.
I'm sorry, I just don't see how Donald Trump as president has been the end of America. I mean, I'm sorry, I just don't see it. I mean, if you look at...
but that's hyperbolic.
That's what he's saying.
No, that is not what he said. He said it's the...
That's pretty close to what I'm saying. Yeah, I mean, you know.
No, come on. I mean, sorry. You may not have been listening to him. I was.
He said the end of the two-party system, or the parties that we know, and maybe there's an opportunity for a third centrist
the reality
party,
is,
which is not the end of America.
The American economy is actually doing very, very well. Thank you very much. And you
see the market
you talk about equality.
I'm teasing. You pointed that out to me.
There's a legitimate concern about the impact of coronavirus on the global economy, and particularly the American economy, that's being reflected. That's how markets work, right? And so there's nothing fundamentally. China, they wouldn't let that happen, but in our country it does happen, and we react accordingly. To think that somehow that Trump has created some sort of dystopian world here, it's just not. That's not what's happening in America. And so we will survive Donald Trump, and we will govern as he is governed, not in tone or in rhetoric, but in reality. Look at the regulatory agenda of Donald Trump. I dare say there's probably not one regulation that Bill Kristol would disagree with that has been published by the president, nor has there been a regulation that he has repealed that you would disagree with. Probably none, right?
I think there are a few,
okay.
but I haven't studied them in detail.
There are 7 regulations being withdrawn for every new regulation that's being put forward. Do you disagree or agree with that? Again, if you look at what's been going on, look at what he's tried to do, and people, you've had some on the far right who have criticized the president for actually trying to help Obamacare to work. And they say, oh, he's not doing that. Actually, he is, because there were certain things that President Obama tried to put in place that he thought would work that haven't worked. And so the president has tried to do things within the confines of the Affordable Care Act to actually make the system work and bring premiums down. And guess what happened? Premiums actually come down the last couple of years. So look, you can say that this is dystopian, that this is the end of democracy in America and the like, but that's not what's happening on the ground. And that's why I think this president's going to get reelected. And that's why I think we will get through this personality of Donald Trump, and we will come out the other side with a different party, but not one that will reflect the charism of Donald Trump, but will reflect the actual actions of Donald Trump and his party, which I think that has been governing for a long time.
Kinder, gentler Donald Trump.
And to answer the question, because one of my greatest faults as a politician is I answer every question and I don't spin it, and it makes for good commentary on CNN, but it makes for being a very bad presidential candidate. On the issue of climate, look, I don't think there are too many Republicans who can't, as you say, read a thermometer and see that the climate is changing. But I think if you look at what's happened with reductions in greenhouse gases in America, the reality is we've done actually a pretty good job vis-a-vis just about every other major country in the world. Yeah. Certainly better than India and China and the other folks who are actually causing most of this global warming, and in fact are expected to accelerate the amount of greenhouse gases. So the idea that Republicans don't want to have a more efficient and clean and healthy environment, it's a fallacy. We just don't want to do it with constrictive government programs. We believe that innovation, for example, I'm involved in a company, in fact, right now in a place called Varaždin, Croatia. There's a machine heating up right now. You say, there he is creating carbon. There's a machine heating up that I'm on the board of this company that is going to take waste and turn it into a clean burning fuel. It's going to take municipal waste and turn it into something that looks like coal and can be used to replace coal. And we hope to do that all throughout Eastern Europe. And it's going to be, we think, a great revolutionary improvement, reducing fossil fuel use in Eastern Europe, which is very problematic there. This is a Republican doing this. Why? I don't want to leave this world in a a dirtier or an unhealthier state for my kids. I got 7 kids. I care about their future. Every Republican I know cares about their future. We just don't believe that a bunch of bureaucrats in Brussels should make these decisions because we don't believe they're particularly good at doing these things. We believe that we need, as Bill said, to create the proper incentives within the marketplace to drive this because it's clear. The public wants and has a right to get a response from both political parties of how to deal with this issue. And I believe Republicans are getting wise to that. And I think you're seeing, and hopefully we'll see even more, attention brought to it.
Bill Kristol, Senator Santorum, David Axelrod, Gretchen, thank you all all of you. Thank you so much for being here tonight. Thank you for your questions. This has been a great evening. Take care.